May 12, 1945, 2:15 p.m. A convoy of canvas-topped lorries wound through Hampshire's narrow lanes under a sky the color of wet slate. Rain drummed against the tarps stretched over the truck beds where 30 German generals sat in silence, their field-gray uniforms darkened by moisture seeping through gaps in the canvas. General Karl Zimmermann, aged 52, pressed his palm against the cold metal railing and watched the English countryside roll past through a tear in the tarp. 3 days earlier, he had commanded an infantry division near Lunenburg. Now he was cargo, bound for internment on an enemy island he had been taught to despise for 5 years. He had expected ruins. The Luftwaffe had pounded British cities relentlessly. London was rubble. Liverpool had burned to ash. Coventry had ceased to exist as anything more than a name. The people starved behind barricades, clinging to survival by American charity alone. British industry had collapsed under the weight of strategic bombing. The Reich Ministry had shown them the reconnaissance photographs, the damage assessments, the casualty projections. But through that gap in the canvas, Zimmermann saw fields that had never known a bomb crater. Fat cattle grazing in pastures bordered by intact stone walls. A farmer on a tractor, diesel smoke puffing into the rain. 3 children in Wellington boots jumping in puddles near a farmhouse with all its windows whole and gleaming. Something was wrong. At Wilton Park, the interrogation facility where they would be held, Zimmermann made a demand that would change everything. He demanded to see the factories. If British industry was not destroyed, if the people were not starving, then show them the proof. The British intelligence officer, a major named Phillips with careful eyes and a Birmingham accent, smiled slightly. "Very well, General. We'll arrange a tour." That tour would shatter everything Zimmermann thought he knew about strength, propaganda, and which side had been living inside a carefully constructed lie. For 5 years, from 1940 through the spring of 1945, the generals of the Wehrmacht had absorbed a consistent narrative about Britain's condition.
London in ruins, Coventry obliterated, Liverpool's ports destroyed, British industry crippled beyond recovery, the population starving, American aid barely keeping them alive. These reports came through official intelligence channels, Luftwaffe reconnaissance photographs, intercepted broadcasts, and Goebbels' radio speeches. They were not pure fabrications. British cities had been bombed, people had suffered, homes had been destroyed. But hardship had been magnified into collapse, damage exaggerated into annihilation, survival twisted into desperation. The generals believed it because they had no reason not to. At Wilton Park, Zimmermann began noticing cracks. The food was rationed but adequate. The barracks were heated. The lights worked. The lorries were plentiful. The guards' uniforms were clean. If Britain was starving, why were prisoners eating regularly? On the 3rd evening, Zimmermann challenged Major Phillips directly. "You say your industry is strong. Show us." Phillips nodded calmly. "I'll make the arrangements." May 19, 1945, 9:30 a.m. The lorries rolled into the Morris Motors plant in Cowley, Oxford. Zimmermann stepped down onto rain-wet tarmac and stared. 5 enormous factory buildings, intact roofs, unbroken windows, rail spurs feeding loading docks, lorries moving steadily in and out.
And the sound. A factory running at full capacity. Assembly lines stretched nearly 200 meters. Military lorries taking shape in stages, frames, axles, engines, electrical systems, paint, inspection. Hundreds of workers, many of them women, operating machinery with practiced precision. 45 lorries per day, the manager explained. 6 days a week, 3 shifts. Zimmerman knew exactly what that meant. This single factory was producing more vehicles than several German plants combined. They moved to engine production, then aircraft components. Spitfires were still being built, still being improved, 3 years after the Battle of Britain. At lunch, they ate in the factory canteen with workers. Real food. Meat, potatoes, gravy. Mrs. Patterson, a welder whose husband served in North Africa, pulled a dented metal lunch tin from her bag and showed them a piece of cake wrapped in wax paper. "From my neighbor," she said. "She baked yesterday." That lunch tin said more than any intelligence report ever had. 2 days later, they visited Rolls-Royce in Derby. Merlin engines by the hundreds, precision manufacturing, research and development underway for future variants. Britain wasn't just surviving, it was planning years ahead. On the return journey, the lorries were silent. At a village pub stop, a publican served them beer. His son had died at Arnhem. "War's over for you lot," he said simply. "No point being cruel." Outside, children played football in a field with a proper leather ball. Not rags, not rubble, just children. That night, Zimmerman couldn't sleep. The factories, the workers, the food, the children.
Every detail contradicted everything he had believed. Britain had not collapsed. The bombing campaign had failed. The U-boat war had failed. Civilian morale had endured. Germany had been fighting a fantasy. Years later, in a university archive in Hamburg, Zimmerman, now 90, kept that dented lunch tin on a shelf. "A reminder," he said, "a reminder that strength is endurance, that propaganda works best on those who create it, that reality persists whether you believe in it or not." The story of German generals touring British factories is not a curiosity. It is a lesson. Show, don't tell. Truth, when revealed openly, is more powerful than any lie carefully constructed. Britain didn't need propaganda. It simply showed the truth, and the truth was devastating.